The Ukrainian defense forces have thwarted a new Russian offensive operation in the Sumy region. This is reported by the Institute for the Study of War. The warriors successfully counterattacked near Mauritsia and Sadki, northeast of the city of Sumy. In addition, Ukrainian troops were able to advance in the north of the Kharkiv region. We are talking about the settlement of Bilyi Kolodiaz. It was there that the armed forces of Ukraine managed to successfully maneuver and push back the Russian occupiers. The State Border Guard Service of Ukraine has confirmed this information. The defense forces struck the personnel of the invaders who were attempting to carry out an operation to raise a flag in the Vovchansk direction. And on the Veliki Burluk bridgehead, Russian troops continue to accumulate assault groups in the forests along the border in the Artelne Milove sector. The enemy is attempting to seize the line and advance with small infantry groups deep into the Ukrainian defense. As noted by the soldiers of the armed forces of Ukraine, the Russians mainly use vehicles to transport personnel, after which the infantry operates in small teams. Thus, during a week of fighting in August, the enemy's losses amounted to 200 liquidated and 150 wounded. Several units of heavy equipment and more than 24 light vehicles were also destroyed. Meanwhile, in the Sloviansk direction, the Ukrainian military repelled attacks by Russian troops in the areas of Rezdiakivka, Ozerne, Kriva Luka, and Zakotne, as well as towards Ryo-Alexandrivka. On the Kostiantynivka sector of the front, the Russian army attacked near Ilinivka, Ivanopilia, Pavlivka, and Novoselivka. And near Pokrovsk, the invaders attempted to break through the Ukrainian defense near Bilitske, Kotline, Kucherov Yar, Vasilivka, Udakne, and Muravka.
In that sector, which we call the Donetsk direction or the Sloviansk, Kramatorsk direction in a broader sense, the enemy has concentrated forces, means troops, armaments, and equipment, roughly the same amount as started this war in February of 2022. In other words, this grouping is desperately trying to advance towards Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. That is precisely why you pointed out that the enemy is moving, trying to advance in these very directions, in these sectors, on the Pokrovsk, on the Kostiantynivka, and to the east of Sloviansk, exerting such desperate pressure, well, generally speaking, with minimal success. They are already paying a very high price for this, having practically abandoned active combat operations on the southern sector of the front, where compared to the Donetsk direction and the Kharkiv direction, the number of combat engagements is minimal.
Ukrainian drones struck 2 Russian bukankas carrying ammunition in one of the eastern directions. The invaders were transporting shells for Grad systems to their positions, but they were spotted in time by the reconnaissance of the 42nd Separate Mechanized Brigade. The Ukrainian military quickly turned both the transport and the ammunition into a pile of scrap metal, and one of the bukankas put on a real fire show. As they detonated, the shells for the Grad flew in literally every direction. Operators from the Apache Unmanned Systems Battalion continue to strike positions of Russian troops. Thus, FPV drones hit a Russian infantryman, a motorcycle, a shelter, a cache, and a Mavic reconnaissance drone. The invaders are trying to change routes, hide equipment, and set up new shelters. However, the Ukrainian military continues to detect and destroy them. And on the Mariupol-Berdyansk highway, drones struck a convoy of Russian trucks transporting logistical supplies for the occupation forces. The published footage shows several damaged vehicles and a large-scale fire. As eyewitnesses note, a large drone first approached the convoy, after which several FPV drones detached from it. They attacked the Russian equipment, resulting in the convoy catching fire.
The next stage of deployment, and not just against fuel trucks, but against other military transport vehicles that are moving, and the drones that have undergone so-called training. This is very important because it is a unique opportunity we have in the defense forces of Ukraine. There are already well-documented and known facts where, for example, long-haul truck drivers themselves bring specialized trained drones right inside their vehicles. And then, when they happen to encounter a specific high-value target on the road, that is perhaps a fuel truck or a large military cargo vehicle, the drone quickly takes off, strikes the target with precision, and thus completely destroys it.
Russia is losing the war. It started itself. This is how European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen reacted to the latest Russian strike on Kyiv. According to her, supplying Ukraine with air defense systems is the most urgent priority.
You can say as many words as you want, but it won't make things any sweeter for Russian propagandists, Russians, or Putin. Well, these are classic propaganda cliches that the Russians are currently integrating both into their internal political agenda ahead of the Duma elections and into their external one. Why the external one? Again, it's very simple. They have even increased spending on supporting their propaganda outside the Russian Federation by 50% this year. And relatively speaking, they are holding round tables, expert readings, communicating with European and American media, and launching many different stories. Sometimes it seems that even very respectable American and European publications are starting to play along with the Russian propaganda game. It's very simple. The simple goal is to show that Russia is ready for dialogue, that the Russian Federation is ready to be a balancer of global energy markets, and that pressure needs to be applied by withholding aid specifically to Ukraine. And the Russian Federation, so to speak, is proceeding according to plan within the framework of those political objectives that Putin set earlier. That is, we are indeed seeing a serious escalation and intensification right now, including on the information front by the Russian Federation. Well, in principle, this is exactly what Mr. Kyslytsya is talking about, as far as I understand, and that we need to counter this extremely actively and effectively by working with our partners and explaining one simple thing. The Russian Federation will not stop at its aggression against Ukraine, and secondly, simply returning to the status quo before the war will significantly weaken the positions of both Europe and potentially the United States of America. If something is not done about the aggressive Putin regime, and preferably in the near future, then in reality, all these Western entities could politically lose. And perhaps within this context, an important message is being conveyed by Mr. Kyslytsya that what, for example, Europe is currently doing within the framework of sanctions packages and the United States of America, well, is not enough at the moment to effectively force the Russian Federation to peace by winter. And if this, in fact, cannot be achieved, then the winter will indeed be difficult not only for Ukraine, but also for the European Union itself. Because look at how much Russia's hybrid attacks have intensified, both with sea drones and regular drones. And a cruise missile even flew into Poland recently and went deep into Polish territory, about 50 or 60 kilometers, if I'm not mistaken. That is where it subsequently fell. In other words, the Russian Federation is currently broadcasting a wide array of different propaganda priorities, all of which share one simple overarching goal: to sow deep discord among the public and accordingly to weaken the international support and aid being provided to Ukraine. It is a calculated strategy designed to fracture unity. But Europeans, I am deeply convinced, clearly realize that this is nothing more than just propaganda. And by the way, you mentioned the words of European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who, in my opinion, once again very specifically and clearly put everything in its place, noting that Russia has lost, and that is precisely why it is constantly shelling peaceful Ukrainian infrastructure and peaceful Ukrainian cities. And by the way, both the Institute for the Study of War and the most powerful think tanks are saying that in the strategic dimension, the Russian Federation has undoubtedly not just lost the war against Ukraine at some point in the future, but has already lost it. And strategically, once again, the consequences for both the economy and support for Putin are already extremely negative. The only question is when they will become so clearly apparent that Russians themselves realize that something needs to be done about this Putin regime. Otherwise, the consequences for them will be simply catastrophic.
Mr. Alexei, you mentioned this provocation with the Russian missile. Let's recall another episode. A Romanian F-16 fighter jet shot down a sea drone near the coast of Constanta, not far from the Neptune deep gas platform in the Black Sea. The video of the operation was released by the interim head of the country's Ministry of Defense, Radu Miruța, who noted that the drone was not Ukrainian. In turn, President Nicu Șordan condemned the incident and accused Russia of escalating the situation.